Hi Grace, it's Pastor Maddie. Today is Maundy Thursday, or the day of Holy Week, when we focus and remember the Last Supper, or the final meal that Jesus shares with his disciples. I wanted to read for you from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26, to hear a bit about this Last Supper, starting on verse 17. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain one and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.' And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed and broke it, and gave it to the disciples and said, 'Take, eat. This is my body.' And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins.'" Many of you probably know those words well. It is a part of our liturgy that we celebrate on the first Sunday of the month when we participate in communion and remember this Last Supper. So this week in Holy Week, we are focusing on these final moments of Jesus' life, and this happens around the festival of Passover. Now, for those who might not remember, Passover is a story from our sacred text found in the book of Exodus. It is the story of the Israelites who were enslaved in Egypt being liberated and going forth from the land to go find the promised land. There were many plagues that were sent as demonstrations of God's power and might, so that the Pharaoh, or the leader of Egypt, might let his people go. Unfortunately, Pharaoh did not let his people go, and the final plague was the death of the firstborn of all of the households in Egypt. The only houses that were exempt were the Israelites' homes, and these homes would be passed over, hence the name Passover, and they would be passed over based on the symbol of the blood of a sacrificed lamb on the two doorposts outside of their homes. So this is a day of sorrow and death, but it is also a day of liberation for the Israelite people, and their leader Moses then leading them out of slavery. One of the wonderful opportunities I had in Chicago when I was at seminary for 3 years is meeting some of my best friends who are Jewish, and they host their own Passover Seder in their homes each year. And so I got the joy of getting to learn a bit about this Jewish tradition and celebration of the Passover meal, which is the context for the Last Supper that we celebrate this Holy Week. Something I want to name that is important to note, the Seder, the Passover Seder that the Jewish people will celebrate today is not the same experience as what Jesus celebrated thousands of years ago. There are obviously similarities because the story of the Passover is the same, and it is from our sacred text, and we lift it up in the same way each year. But how Jewish people will celebrate the Passover Seder has evolved and is a strictly Jewish tradition. And so as Christians, we have the privilege of getting to learn and educate ourselves about this tradition, and when invited, being able to participate. And so I got the chance to have a conversation with my friend Beth, who has hosted this Passover Seder, and she is going to share a bit about what this tradition means for her and what the tradition itself looks like, so that we might get to learn a bit more from our Jewish brothers and sisters about the Passover Seder.
Well, hello. I am super excited to introduce one of my favorite people. This is Beth, and she is somebody that I had the pleasure of knowing in Chicago, and she is also somebody who has invited me to participate in her Passover Seders. And so Beth is going to share a little bit about Passover, and Beth, if you just want to start maybe introducing yourself and maybe sharing how long you've been celebrating Passover in your family.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Beth. Thanks for listening to my video. Nice to meet everyone. So I met Maddie when she lived in Chicago, like she said. She was at seminary and I was in library school, and so we used to study together a lot, but also make some time for fun too. So I live in Chicago currently. I'm a school librarian, so I work with 1st through 5th graders, which is a lot of fun. And I am from Skokie, which is a nearby suburb, and I have been celebrating Passover since I was born, so as long as I can remember.
Awesome. So for those of us who maybe aren't familiar with what Passover Seder looks like, do you mind sharing just a bit of what the evening is all about and how it's structured?
Yeah, so Passover happens every spring, usually right around Easter. The date changes each year, but it is a time that we get together with family and friends, and we celebrate when the Jews were led by Moses out of slavery in Egypt and got to the Holy Land and were free. And so it generally consists of 2 nights. You have a Seder each night, which is a big meal, and you also have a lot of songs and prayers and different rituals that go in a certain order, because Seder means order.
Very cool. And so many people might have heard of this Seder Plate. And so could you explain a little bit what's on the plate and what that symbolizes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just got a list here I was getting. So one thing on the Seder Plate that you have, and the Seder Plate is just a plate with a lot of different things on it, sort of in little holes. One is matzah. Matzah is just like a thin cracker that we eat, and that is because when the Jews fled slavery, they didn't have time for their bread to rise. And so they took what is now considered matzah with them, which is like a cracker. So we have matzah. Another thing we have is a shank bone, which is the bone from a lamb, and that's because we used to sacrifice lambs back in Egypt. If you're a vegetarian, you can put a beet on the Seder Plate instead. We also have an egg, because an egg symbolizes spring, renewal, and new life. We have bitter herbs. Sometimes lettuce is used, as well as horseradish, which if you've had before is like super spicy, super bitter, and that's to talk about how bitter slavery was. We also have haroset, which in my opinion is the most delicious thing on the plate. It's like apples, walnuts, and cinnamon all ground together in a food processor, and that symbolizes paste, like the paste that was used to build the pyramids when we were slaves. The last 2 things are parsley, again, which is also to be bitter, to symbolize that sadness and that we had in slavery. And the last one is an orange, which some people put on the plate for feminism, because a rabbi once said, there will be female rabbis when there's an orange on the Seder Plate, which now we have female rabbis, and we have an orange on the Seder Plate.
That's awesome. So a quick question about, so do you pass the Seder Plate around, and like how does the evening kind of like occur?
Yeah, so generally there's just one Seder Plate, but we have something called a Haggadah, which is a book that tells you the order. And so everyone will go around and take turns kind of reading what comes next, whether that's singing a song, saying a prayer, washing your hands, drinking a glass of wine. And there's a part of the Seder when someone will hold up the Seder Plate and kind of point to each item, and you will have enough eggs for everyone to eat. Traditionally, you have an egg and salt water, also parsley and haroset. Everyone will have a chance to eat those, as well as the bitter herbs and the horseradish.
Awesome. And I know that it probably depends who you are, but what are some other like traditional foods that might go along with a Passover Seder?
So the main thing is during your Passover Seder is that you can't have anything that's leavened. So anything that rose in it. So you couldn't have like pizza or bread. Everything has to be made with matzah or not have traditional bread in it. So a lot of times people will have a matzah kugel. A kugel is like a noodle casserole, but it'll be made with matzah pieces. People will have like meat if you eat meat, maybe chicken, turkey. Don't have a traditional ham since that's not kosher. So that's a big difference on Easter. You have like a brisket or turkey. And people for dessert will often have chocolate covered matzah, which is really good.
That's awesome. So a fun fact is we thought that because the matzah was like unleavened, it meant there was no gluten, and that is wrong.
Yeah.
So there's definitely gluten in matzah, and that was a mistake the first round. So another question for you: what for you feels like the most meaningful, or what is one of your favorite parts of the Passover Seder?
For me, what always has been special is just getting to be with family and friends. So as a kid, we went to my grandparents' house every year, and my cousins came from North Carolina, and it was a time to just be together, and especially be with my grandpa, who would organize like scavenger hunts to find bread in the house before Passover started. We'd have to scoop it all up and throw it out, and he'd organize, fun games. We'd sing songs, and now it's nice just to be with friends and to kind of make my own traditions.
Yeah, so going along with that, how have you been able to, because I've been so lucky to be a part of some of your Passover Seders. How have you made these traditions like more your own now that you've been able to host them?
Yeah, so one thing that we've done is used a lot of old family recipes, which has been nice. Like I have an apple cake recipe that was my grandma's friend's mother. And so that recipe is probably from like the 1930s. And it's cool to make this cake that's, 100 years old. And my roommate will make matzo ball soup that's been in his family for years. So we bring a lot of those. We have also adapted things where our Seder's a little bit shorter than when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it would probably be like 3 or 4 hours. Now we do maybe an hour or two. So we've adapted that. And also trying to add in ties to like current situations and current political situations, because Passover is all about freedom and justice and a better future ahead. And so it's great to have discussions now about how we can help people who are in these systematic forms of oppression, and how we can look at history to help people in today.
Absolutely. And I know last year I had the privilege of hearing you sing. And so, could you say a little bit about that?
Yes, so there is a song that is about the 4 questions, and the youngest person in each family or at each Seder is supposed to sing the 4 questions in Hebrew. And so I was always the youngest as a kid. So every year I had to sing for my whole family, which I never wanted to because I have a pretty good voice, and so they'd expect like a real performance, and I'd be practicing all week. And it was so embarrassing. And so I still do it now just because they're like ingrained. I could probably sing it in my head, memorized all the time. But they're just asking questions like, why is this night different from all other nights? Or why do we eat bitter herbs? So it's just kind of asking those basic questions, and then we sing back the answers.
Oh, that's really cool. And I guess a question for you, now that we're in a time of social distancing, how are you planning to celebrate Passover this year?
Yeah, so luckily I live with 3 roommates, and so we're going to be having sort of a very small Seder. Instead of making, 10 different dishes, we'll probably have soup and cake, maybe some eggs, and I'll be Zooming into a Seder with my roommates, aunt and uncle, and then tomorrow I'll be Zooming into a Seder with my dad's friends who we normally do Passover with. So it'll be really interesting to see how that goes. I can only imagine everyone has their own books and you're taking turns, and it'll probably be chaos, but it'll be wonderful to see everyone's faces. So
that's awesome. So one final question I have for you. I guess if there is one thing that people could know about like a Passover Seder, or something meaningful to you, or just like kind of one thing to take from this tradition, what would you say?
I think Passover is really just all about hoping for a better future, and knowing that even when things are really hard, like right now, that there is hope and things will get better. And just that being like with your family and friends, and remembering that there are periods of history that are really terrible and hard, but things work out in the end. So I think that's an important message like every year that we share.
Absolutely. Well, Beth, thank you so much for sharing. And I know I learn a ton every year, even though I've gotten to participate, in different ways. It's just cool to keep learning. So thanks for sharing, Brett.
Yeah, of course. Happy Easter, everyone. And I hope you learned a little bit about Passover. Bye.